Hey folks, I have more than 20 brand new books to share with you today, and as usual, these are all published by independent publishers and university presses. These books all came out within the last month, so all published in July 2023, and I know that there will be something for everyone on this list, so let's jump right in. First up is a book with a title that's close to my heart called The Kielbasa Killer. The kielbasa part, not the killer part. This is by Geri Krotow, and it's published by Severn House, which is a publisher of genre fiction. This is a cozy mystery set in Buffalo, New York, and it's about our main character, Lydia Winooski. Lydia must temporarily take over her family's business in Buffalo called Winooski's Wieners and Meats, and she is tasked with selling a whole bunch of kielbasa over the very busy Easter weekend, only to, of course, find the business's meat supplier dead next to the smoker with her great-great-grandpa's sausage sticker. Did I get that right? It's called sausage pricker. With her great-great-grandpa's antique sausage pricker sticking out of his neck. Next is a novel called Audition, which is by Pip Adam, and this is from Giramondo, which is an independent publisher in Australia. And this is a genre-bending novel that is about a spaceship called Audition, and 3 giants are riding in this spaceship, and they are crammed into one huge room in the spaceship. And as long as these 3 giants keep talking, the spaceship keeps moving forward, but as soon as they stop talking, the spaceship stops and they start growing. Their bodies start growing. So squashed into this room together, they keep talking, and together they kind of recover the memory of what has happened to them. And from the description online, it says this book is part science fiction, part social realism, and asks what happens when systems of power decide someone takes up too much room. These are in like no particular order, except for kind of in chronological order of when they were published in July, because that's how I add them to my list. So no real order here. Published by University of Queensland Press is Roseghetto, which is by Kirsty Jagger. This is the story of Shayla, who grows up in the 80s and 90s in a public housing estate of Roseghetto in Sydney's western suburbs. And as an adult, in the beginning of the novel, she returns to the neighborhood only to find that it has been razed to the ground. It's been completely torn down. And from there, she's drawn back into memories of growing up in the neighborhood amidst poverty and hardship. I've seen some reviews saying this is a very, very sad book, and it is a fictional account, but it is also partly inspired by the author's own childhood growing up in the housing commission estates of Sydney's western suburbs. From Milkweed is a short story collection called Call Up the Waters, and it's by Amber Caron. And these 10 stories are the author's debut collection, and they're about the daily lives and labors of girls and women in rural America. And these stories depict characters who live and work closely with the natural world. I think there's a lot of like devastating natural events like storms and floods and fires and droughts, but paired up against these kind of dramatic natural events or stories about the deep emotional journeys of each of these characters. From Charco Press is a book by Claudia Piniero called A Little Luck. And this novel is narrated by a woman named Mary Lohan, who escaped some sort of devastating secret from her life in Argentina. And she escaped by leaving her home outside of Buenos Aires. And she is plunged back into her past, I believe, because she encounters her long-lost son who she left behind. And at some point she had even like changed her name and her voice and her physical appearance. And I'm sure many of you recognize Claudia Piniero's name from her most recent Charco Press novel, Elena Knows. This book and that book were translated by Frances Riddle. From Biblioasis is The Country of Tuo by Rodrigo Rosa, and it's translated by Stephen Henighan. And this is a thriller by an acclaimed Guatemalan novelist, and it's about a man called the Cobra. And the Cobra is a young debt collector who is hired to murder a prominent human rights activist. And this human rights activist has been fighting to try and protect a Mayan community who lives in a remote region, who is being threatened by predatory mining companies. And at some point in the novel, the Cobra starts to have second thoughts about killing this human rights activist. From Islandport Press is a novel called Just East of Nowhere, and it's by Scot Lehigh. And Islandport Press is a publisher that's based in Maine in the United States, and they publish books that are from or celebrate the state of Maine. And this is a debut novel, and it's described as a gritty coming-of-age story that's set in some hidden pockets of down east Maine. And it's the story of a young man who returns home after something like 9 years in juvenile prison, but he's come home and his mother has passed away while he's been in prison. It's described as fast-paced and really giving unsettling portraits of troubled characters who live in this really struggling coastal town. From Catapult is a novel called All Night Pharmacy, and it's by Ruth Madievsky. I've been seeing this book around a whole big bunch and seen it get a lot of praise. This is a debut novel, and it's described as a fever dream of a story about a young woman living in LA and dealing with the aftermath of one drunken, violent, crazy night and her sister's subsequent disappearance. It's full of sex, drugs, family dynamics. It's described as atmospheric and gritty. The author is also a poet, which is something I particularly love. I tend to really love fiction written by poets. From Coffee House Press is a novella called The Plotinus, and it's by Ricky Ducournay. And this is an absurd, surreal novel that is about a man who finds himself arrested by a robot called the Plotinus. And the reason he's arrested is because he dared to go out walking with a knobby stick. And this knobby stick is just too organic and imperfect for this robot, the Plotinus. So the man is arrested and he's put in this tiny closet where like the only beam of light is coming from an air vent. And the man starts to tell his story by rapping with his knuckles in code on the air vent, and that becomes the novel. His only company is like, I think, another robot who comes in and is like fascinated with him, but then also a wasp that comes in and stings him, but then that's like the only other living creature, and he like collects piles of dust, and then the Plotinus comes in and is like, you shouldn't be collecting dust. And the author, Ricky Ducournay, is probably the inspiration for a hit song in the 1970s. And if anybody can tell me the name of that song and the artist, I'll give you a shout out in my next video. So put it in the comments. From $2 Radio is a novel called The Holy Days of Gregorio Pasos. And this is by Rodrigo Restrepo Montoya. This is a debut novel, and it's narrated by Gregorio Pasos, and he narrates his life story from a hospital bed where he is recovering from a soccer injury. And he tells of his childhood and his parents' divorce, and also a trip he took as an 18-year-old with his uncle to Colombia to spend some time with family and friends. And then he returns to a job in DC where he deals with increasing anti-immigrant rhetoric in DC and in the US in general. And it sounds like the novel in parts draws parallels between Colombia's violent history and the United States under Trump's presidency. From And Other Stories is a collection of loosely connected stories called You, Bleeding Childhood, and it is by the Italian author Michel Marie, and it's translated by Brian Robert Moore. This author is a beloved Italian author, and this is a cult classic appearing for the first time in English. It was originally published in 1997, and again, these are loosely connected, often very surreal stories that explore and catalog childhood obsessions with comic books and science fiction. And the author has been at times compared to Kafka and Borges. And the blurb online said that this was like autofiction before autofiction was like a thing, like a popular thing. It is like it's linked to the author's own childhood, but then also taking very surreal, strange turns. From Bellevue Literary Press is The Ice Harp by Norman Locke. And this is the 10th novel of Norman Locke's series with Bellevue called the American Novel Series. And these are 10 standalone novels, and each of them, from what I can tell, fictionalize stories of great American writers and thinkers. So it takes people like Mark Twain and Louisa May Alcott and Herman Melville and Edgar Allan Poe and Emily Dickinson, and like takes some element of their life or their philosophies and turns it into a novel. So in this 10th novel, Locke is portraying an aging Ralph Waldo Emerson who is dealing with early dementia. It's only like a couple years before he passes away. So he's dealing with early dementia and fretting over the fate of humanity and the planet, what responsibilities we hold to one another. Then one day, all of these metaphysical concerns of his become very concrete and real because he meets a man, a black soldier, who is accused of killing a white man, but he killed this man in self-defense. So I'll link to the series below. It sounds so fascinating, really, really interesting series of books all through Bellevue Literary Press. From Levine Querido is Those Who Saw the Sun by Jaha Naila Avery. And this is an oral history. It's oral histories told by Black people who grew up in the South during the time of Jim Crow. And the author interviews 10 different people, all from very different, a wide range of backgrounds, to share this history as it was lived by those who were really there. From Saraband Books is a short story collection called The Book of Disbelieving, and this is by David Lawrence Morse. And I am still learning how to describe books of short stories, especially weird short stories, which are some of my favorite kinds of short stories, but they're hard to describe before you've actually read them. So these are 9 fantastical stories, and they all take place in like alternate realities and fabulous worlds. For example, a village built on the back of a whale. So I think I'm going to use Amy Bender's words to describe the book because I really love Amy Bender, the author. So Amy Bender says about this collection, with its light touch, the Book of Disbelieving skillfully tracks how a change in worldview, subtle or bold, recreates the ways we look at society and one another. There's wild imagination here in the service of investigating relationships of all kinds, and each story reverberates beautifully into the next. From the Feminist Press is a memoir by Shad Al-Shamari, and it's called Head Above Water. This is another book I've seen popping up in a lot of different places. The author is a Kuwaiti Palestinian professor of English literature. The author was also diagnosed with multiple sclerosis at the age of 18, and she was told that she wouldn't live past the age of 30. But she went on to go to college and then go to graduate school to study English literature in the UK, and then came back to Kuwait to teach. And it's a memoir that is exploring disability and also exploring culture and gender and race. And again, I've been seeing it all over the place. From Rose Metal Press is an anthology on a craft subject, craft of writing, and it's called The Field Guide to Graphic Literature, and it's edited by Kelsey Ervick and Tom Hart. And Rose Metal Press is a publisher I've kind of had my eye on a little bit. I don't have anything published by them yet. They publish hybrid work. So a lot of stuff that's hard to categorize, but including they do publish flash fiction and flash nonfiction and prose poetry and all sorts of really interesting stuff. But they also publish these field guides that are like anthologies, collections of essays and things written by many different authors on specific subjects. They have a field guide to prose poetry, a field guide to flash fiction, a field guide to flash nonfiction, and now this field guide to graphic literature. So this particular field guide gives readers insights into the techniques of 28 different creators of comics and graphic narratives, and it includes craft essays and writing exercises and full color examples of the writers and creators' work. And it sounds, from a craft perspective, sounds so cool. From Spinifex Press, which is a feminist press in Australia, is Chinangwa by Lucy Mushida. And this is a novel that was actually first published in 2008, but now it's being republished in Australia. And it takes place in the early 20th century in a village in the country that's now known as Zimbabwe. And it's about a girl named Chinangwa whose family is very, very poor, and who, in order to just be able to feed themselves, trade Chinangwa into marriage. And I want to say Chinangwa is something like 9 years old at the time. So it's told from Chinangwa's perspective and tells her story of trying to survive and trying to do her best and do as she's told in this new family, but then also her attempts to claim some independence for herself. From Counterpoint is The Forest Brims Over, and it's by Maru Ayase, translated by Hayden Trowell. This is the first of the writer's work to be translated, I think, from Japanese into English. And this is a very surreal story of a woman who turns herself into a forest after having to serve for a decade as her husband's muse and inspiration for his novels. So the novel is initially told by the husband, so the novelist's editor, who is put in a tricky ethical situation when he realizes that this woman is turned into a forest, but the novelist won't take his wife to the hospital because he thinks it would be more interesting to keep her and write another novel about what's happening to her. It sounds fascinating. From Tin House is a novel, a debut novel called Glaciers, and another cover that I think I've seen this cover for like a full year and have been in love with it. But this is by Alexis Smith. Very important. The author's more important than the cover. Alexis Smith. So this is a debut novel, and it's about a 20-something character who lives in Portland, Oregon, and has a job repairing library books in the basement of this library. And I think the novel takes place only over the course of one single day. And the main character spends that day thinking about her past and really dreaming of a life that she can't seem to quite achieve. And the title apparently comes from some memory of a life-changing encounter that the narrator or main character had with a glacier. From City Lights Books is a poetry collection called Emerald Wounds, selected poems by Joyce Mansour. The editor is Emily Morehouse, and the translator is also Emily Morehouse. Joyce Mansour was the most significant surrealist poet to emerge from 1950s Paris. And this new collection is a bilingual anthology, so it has both French and English poems. And it also includes a great biographical introduction, and then collects her most important work, spanning the entire arc of her career. If you want a taste of Joyce Mansour's poetry, you can actually find some of these poems on Poetry Foundation's website, including a poem titled Fever Your Sex is a Crab, and I'll leave that link below. And finally, the last on the list for today, but certainly not even scratching the surface of all of the books that were published by indie presses in the month of July. The last one we'll mention is not one book, but a collection of 8 chapbooks called Iyagi. These are chapbooks from Strangers Press, which is a UK-based publisher that publishes these really cool sets of chapbooks, and each series comes from a different country or are works translated into English from one single language. So I have 3 of their sets. I have their first Korea set, I have their Japan set, and the set from the Netherlands. And they're really, really beautiful chapbooks, beautifully done. And this new set, their newest set, is their second Korea set. So these are 8 different chapbooks, and they say on their website that Iyagi means story in Korean. And so these are 8 stories from 8 different authors, and it describes this series as a literary tapas banquet. So you can get a little taste of all 8 of these different authors and see what they're like. So I'll end as usual with a little show and tell. So there was a little shop that opened recently kind of near where I live. It's an adorable little stationery shop called Paper and Pencil. And it, as the name suggests, sells mostly papers and pencils, but they also have a lot of pens too. So it's so tiny and adorable, a little gem of a place. And so of course I got some little fun things, including a little side clip pen holder. So you just clip to the cover, and you can put your pencil or pen right there. And that's exactly what I need to keep my pencils with my books. Got 2 of those. I got adorable little summary pencils strawberries and cherries. So cute. I got little tabs, although I never really use these. I know a lot of people do. They're pretty colors, so I couldn't not buy them. But I don't use these, so that was a silly purchase. And then I got a nice little desk calendar, just no dates on it, which is really nice. So I don't feel pressure to actually use it every month. I could just use it when I want. That's it. I've shown you everything. Thanks so much for joining me today. If any of these books sounded intriguing to you, I hope you'll hit the like button, and maybe that will help these books spread a little bit more widely on the interwebs and get into the hands of more readers like you and me who think they sound amazing. I hope you'll let me know which of these books sounded intriguing to you in the comments, or maybe what you've been reading lately. Thank you so, so much. I'll see you next time. Bye. My name's Sarah. Bye. I'm back. Don't forget, if you can tell me what song was inspired by Ricky Ducornet, hit song from the 1970s, tell me the song title and the artist in the comments below. I will shout you out in a major way in my next video. See you next time.